And in order to help me do that, I have Laurie Segall coming back. She's normally with CNN, roaming the world and finding out all the secrets of the digital world. And just if we have a little intro for the ones that don't know, Laurie.
An exclusive interview with CNN's Laurie Segall.
Let's bring in Laurie Segall, our tech correspondent from CNN Money.
Our Laurie Segall reports.
Take a look at what she told CNN's Laurie Segall.
With me this evening, my very good friend, Laurie Segall. Let me get into the nitty-gritty here.
Much of the conversation is, talking about, hey, everyone's whining and dining, and this is happening 50, 60 miles away, so you can't ignore that.
In short, it's all about geolocation. You can see here, he posted 32 photos on the Russian side of the border, 2 pictures from Ukraine. The conversation we're having now is the site's just not working. The conversation I guarantee we will be having is the security flaws in the system.
You don't want to be the first to market, you want to be the last to market.
I'm still a punk.
You're a punk, but now you're the tech equivalent of the Ramones. What's funny about Silicon Valley?
We're at this kind of absurd time in history where people who are 24 are suddenly worth, $10 billion in a matter of a year.
Thank you very much.
And a half.
Give a warm round of applause for
services that you guys
Laurie
are sometimes
Segall.
too aggressive with your business tactics.
Look, at the end of the day, I think we made some really strong principles, and we feel good about how we act in the marketplace.
Hi.
Welcome back to Stockholm.
Thanks so much for having me. Update, he's no longer the CEO of Uber. Some things have changed.
Yes, so I'm following your shows. I know some of the things that has been going on, but I mean, what a year. So many things have happened. What are some of the things that sort of strikes you as most interesting and amazing or controversial during this year?
I remember, it's always cool to come here. I've come here for the last couple of years, and I remember last year, we were talking about ethics and technology and this responsibility, kind of what you were talking about. That just blew up, because I remember sitting with some of those founders who you guys see right there. I remember sitting with Travis from Uber asking, about monetization. Are people really going to feel safe getting in a car? Now we're talking about massive sexism scandals. We're talking about the role and responsibility of tech leaders. I recently sat with Ev Williams, who's one of the co-founders of Twitter, and he was saying, he was talking about how difficult it is to decipher between a political fact and fiction, and should tech companies have the responsibility of doing that?
Does he feel it? Because before they just wanted to be, no, we're like the phone company. I don't care what you say in my line.
Right.
But I mean, don't they have a responsibility?
I think this is the new era where tech founders are really struggling with a new sense of responsibility. I think there's always been this optimistic, we're going to change the world. And I think we're kind of at this point where we're looking at it and we're like, the world has changed, but has it changed for the better? You talk a little bit, about are we in our own filter bubbles and tribalism and that kind of thing. And I think, Ev was so funny, because I'm sitting across from this guy who's always just been kind of a dreamer when it comes to democratizing technology. He created Twitter, that's the whole idea behind it. And he was saying, people want editorial guidelines, but, we don't want that. And I was like, Ev, do you even really have a choice? You have to kick off certain people. So we explore a lot of that stuff. I have a series that we just did called Devided We Code that explores all those gray area tech questions and the growing responsibility of tech leaders. I think we actually might have a trailer too, if you want to play it.
There's a principle that evil festers in darkness.
Tech companies with power and control over what we see.
All speech has consequences. This is evident. This can't be controlled, and you shouldn't try to control it.
A culture war is bubbling under the surface.
We had a room at the office that was called the Kink Room.
Secret identities.
There's a real fear.
People want to out people who are center-right, as if it's like a sport.
And lies.
I was completely blackballed in the community.
Further on the margins, the rise of alternative tech platforms.
This is so offensive.
Online communities congregating around something called the red pill.
I think in many ways we have become our avatars. We have become offline the people that we are online.
Is the very same technology designed to give everyone a voice dividing us further?
And what are some of the things you found in Devided? Do you think that technology drives us further away from each other?
I think we have to be careful at this point. You know, I've always been an optimist. I was the reporter before anyone was going and paying attention to the Twitter founder, the Uber founder, all these people. I was knocking on doors at CNN to get these people on air. And I think now we have to knock on their doors and say, you know, what kind of responsibility do you have? Because if you look at it from in the United States and you look at what's happened with the election and people what was kind of crazy is everybody was so surprised by the outcome of the election in some worlds, and other people weren't at all. So it just showed we all live in our own little bubbles. We all are kind of increasingly in these bubbles. And I think increasingly we wonder if we're almost controlled by the algorithms, if we're coding a world that only looks like how we want it to look, and what's the role and responsibility of tech leaders in doing so. And it's interesting because Mark Zuckerberg doesn't like to do television interviews, hates doing television interviews. And I recently interviewed him. It was his first broadcast interview in 5 years. And I was like, why does he want to do it? I mean, he must really have something he wants to say for him to want to go on camera, because he doesn't really like doing that. And what he wanted to say was they're changing the mission of Facebook. As opposed to making the world more connected, it's bringing the world closer together.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, the founder of Instagram, who I've known for many years, also changed their motto, something similar. So I think you're beginning to see some of these people and some of these entrepreneurs wonder, you know, how do we use tech to solve real problems? Are we connecting, or are we continuing to just divide us further?
You interviewed Andrew McLaughlin, who's been twice a Sime speaker. He was the CTO of Obama administration, but he was also chief policy officer of Google. There were some interesting things he said that I'd like you to reflect on. Could we play the movie, please?
For the internet, we built this incredible common space. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter were created, blogging platforms where anybody could show up and speak.
A virtual town square.
Economists for 100 years have had this principle, which is called the tragedy of the commons, that says if you have a common space, a park, and anybody can go and use it without controls, the tragedy will be that that space gets trashed.
Fast forward to the internet today. Social networks promise to democratize information. But in the last year, Russians have bought ads on Facebook to target voters, aiming to sway an election. An army of bots is spreading propaganda through Twitter, and hate speech is going viral, turning offline. The virtual town square is getting overrun.
And what does he mean by that?
Well, it's just fascinating because, and even talking to Ev from Twitter about this, the whole idealistic view of the internet was we could all go to this common place and we could shout it out and the truth could eventually come through. But now we're at this turning point where on Twitter, you can't really shout out all of your truth because now there are all these bots too that are, you know, there's actual technology in place that's working against what that ethos is, and they haven't 100% gotten control over it. I mean, did you guys know that there are only about 12 or 13 people inside of Twitter who are actually specifically working on looking at what happened with the election and the propaganda stuff? That's a very small number for a very big problem. Facebook, you know, you have all these tech executives. It was such an incredibly eye-opening moment in the States when you had these tech executives, not the tech CEOs, they didn't show up, but the general counsels did, to go to Congress, go to Capitol Hill and talk about what happened during the election and the weaponization of their platform. So, you know, you are beginning to see this growing sense of responsibility, and I think there's a fear of regulation, too, a fear that if we don't get it together, you know, then the government's going to come in and regulate. I recently asked Eric Schmidt about that, too, and he said, well, they think they can do this better than us. Like, these are tough problems. So I think we're seeing, you know, these real tough problems that these tech companies are trying to take on. But, you know, I had a show come out called Mostly Human, and someone said something to me that, like, we are the beta test, you know? We are kind of the beta test of, you know, how much time are we spending on our phones? What are we getting divided further? And I went to this kind of meetup where a bunch of tech engineers, and it was almost kind of like, I don't know how to say this in a proper way, like an A for like engineers who felt like they'd done really bad things. And I went, it was an underground meetup at a big tech company, and you had like engineers from Apple and Uber. And I spoke to someone, and he said, you know, we used to sit around at a table, and we used to high-five each other when we realized we had created an algorithm that could make you pick up your phone more than you'd pick up a cigarette. And he's like, in retrospect, I'm not sure that was a great idea. I was like, wait, now I pick up my phone every second. You know, so then now they're trying to think of more mindful practices in building products. So, you know, I do think we've reached a turning point. And I thought one interesting thing you said, you're talking about AI picking up kind of the worst sides of us. That's like a real thing. As part of the show, I interviewed a woman whose friend passed away, and she used artificial intelligence to create a bot, used all his text messages and tweets to create a digital version of him so she could still talk to a version of him. And so because I'm a masochist, we tried to do that for me as well. And I gave them all of my text messages and my tweets and everything, and they created a digital Laurie bot. But it picked up like all my worst traits and none of my good ones, and would just like casually text really offensive things to people. So, you know, if there's like a human way to look at the power of technology, have your bot go on a bender on television. Like, it was awful. So those things are very real.